The story of Efland and Cedar Grove would not be complete without the first people who lived in the area, Native Americans. Historians and archaeologists tell us there is evidence of Native Americans in North Carolina going back 8,000 years or more. Some of the most important evidence of these early inhabitants has been found about 75 miles southeast of Efland and Cedar Grove. These were nomadic people living by hunting and fishing and eating wild plants, which were sometimes also used for medicinal purposes. By around 1000 BC, Native Americans in our area began to construct semi-permanent villages, often near rivers or streams. Agriculture, pottery, and other developments were added to their hunting and fishing skills. About 2,000 years ago, they began to grow corn. Over the next 1,500 years, before Europeans arrived, Native Americans developed larger villages, and tribes became political and cultural units, often with strong leaders. Some villages were surrounded by primitive defensive structures, resembling forts. Agriculture was becoming more advanced, and crops included beans, corn, gourds, and squash. They also continued to gather seeds, nuts, and plants for food, and to hunt game for meat. In addition to pottery and clay, bone, stone, wood, and copper were used in making tools, implements, and weapons. Hernando de Soto and his men were the first Europeans to visit the interior of North Carolina around 1540. This Spanish expedition traveled near what are now Charlotte, Hickory, Marion, and Morganton, North Carolina. Between 1566 and 1568, Spanish explorer Juan Pardo and his men undertook expeditions that again visited North Carolina, including some of the same places that De Soto had visited more than 25 years before. They established Fort San Juan adjacent to a Native American village known as Jawara near present-day Morganton. Ongoing archaeological work provides additional insight into the 16th century Spanish presence there. Scouting parties from these expeditions may have explored within 100 miles or less of Efland and Cedar Grove over 450 years ago. Imagine the shock of these Native American peoples. After literally thousands of years of coexistence and sometimes wars with other Native Americans, suddenly aliens show up with armor, firearms, and metal tools. Native Americans in coastal regions near the Gulf of Mexico and the Atlantic Ocean had already encountered Europeans, sometimes with peaceful results, and occasionally with hostile and violent outcomes. It would be almost 100 years after the Spanish expeditions of the 16th century before European explorers and traders would regularly travel deep into what is now North Carolina. Most European activity in North Carolina prior to 1650 was limited to the coastal regions. By 1670, early pioneers, mostly traders, were active across North Carolina. They traveled south from Virginia and west from coastal Carolina. Some made it in as far as the Blue Ridge Mountains. By around 1700, their numbers had increased. New trading routes had opened from the east at Charleston, South Carolina, and some had expanded past North Carolina into Tennessee.
Many of these early explorers, pioneers, and traders traveled along the Great Trading Path. There were, of course, many paths and routes throughout North Carolina, but the best known and most traveled of these was the Great Trading Path, which passed through what is now Efland and just south of Cedar Grove. Its course was changed from time to time, mainly due to conflicts that made travel dangerous in certain areas. It is believed that the Great Trading Path passed through Efland south of I-40/85, near what is now West 10 Road. Native Americans living in North Carolina included Cherokee, Catawba, Shakori, Sissipahaw, Zaguri, Waccamaw, Waxhaw, Shiraw, Eno, Kiawe, Occaneechi, Saponi, and others. And most of these probably traveled through the Efland and Cedar Grove area along the Great Trading Path. The Native Americans that actually lived in the area were most likely Shakori, Eno, Sissipahaw, Saponi, and or Occaneechi, although this too is debated among historians. When De Soto and Juan Pardo visited the interior of North Carolina in the mid-1500s, it's estimated that there were 100,000 Native Americans living in what is now North Carolina. By 1800, that number is estimated to have fallen to 20,000 or fewer. What happened? Native Americans had no immunity to European diseases. Smallpox, influenza, and measles killed thousands. Battles with Europeans and other tribes took a toll, and the combination of disease and war drove many of the surviving Native Americans to move out of the area. Between 1675 and the early 1700s, Native Americans and traders were the primary residents and travelers in the North Carolina Piedmont. Little is known about the few hardy settlers in or near Efland and Cedar Grove prior to the 1740s. Between 1740 and 1760, many settlers moved into the Piedmont, most of whom were of Scottish or German descent, along with smaller numbers of English and Welsh. Orange County was established in 1752 because of this large influx of settlers. Also around 1752, a major east-west road had developed along what is now Lebanon Road. Early land grants in the Efland area in the 1750s were made to Andrew Mitchell, James McGowan, Joseph Maddock, Thomas Norris, Robert Whitty, James Menace, James Riley, and others. The Andrew Mitchell grant included what would today be considered downtown Efland, the crossroad on 70. By the summer of 1755, Joseph Maddock had established a grist mill on the Eno River, just above the bridge on US 70.